Hello, I'm Brendan Stern. I'm honored to be here with Sofia Seitchik for the Jewish Deaf Congress Spotlight on the Jewish Deaf Leaders. Before we begin our discussion, I would like to ask a few questions. I want to grab this opportunity for Sofia to introduce herself because, like we discussed earlier, you asked me why I picked you. I wanted to share that comment before we get started. If you ask me who are the leaders throughout the world that I want to interview, I feel like there's a lot of the same people that get interviewed over and over again, and I wanted new people. Rosen sent me several names, and your name came up. It was an interesting name, so I Googled you and saw that you had an impressive background with extensive experience. So I wanted to grab this opportunity to introduce you a little bit, and why do you think we selected you before we begin the interview? Thank you, thank you. It's really a huge honor for me to be interviewed on the Jewish Deaf Leaders. To summarize my background, I was born in, which is famous for being part of the Silk Road, in the city of Samarkand. I was born into a Jewish family in an Islamic country. So I grew up being exposed to their culture and religions. During that time, the country was under the Soviet Union, which meant it was a communist run and people weren't allowed to practice their religious freedom. My family kept it under the radar when I grew up. I came from a large family. About 150,000 members belonged to a tribe known as the Bukharian Jews. When my parents found out I was deaf, they didn't know what to do because there were not many opportunities for deaf people in the Islamic countries. So they sent me to a school in St. Petersburg, Russia, which was 3,000 miles away. It was a totally different world. The Russians had light skin, blue eyes, and blonde hair, and I had none of them, so I definitely stood out. I was sent there when I was 3 years old and stayed there until I was 17. I did not see my family for 9 months every year, which means I was practically raised at the school. My parents got tired of hiding the religion, in addition to separating me from them. Then there were political uprisings surfacing in the Soviet Union, so we moved to New York City. I was 16. It was my first discovery about my Jewish identity because it was the first time I got to live year round with my family. I learned that my family is very religious and they practice all kinds of traditions, rituals, and so forth. I graduated from the Lexington School of the Deaf, where I learned English and American Sign Language. I graduated from Gallaudet with a degree in Communications Arts. I work for a nonprofit organization, but my vision was so huge. My motivation was so huge. I wanted to help people, so I decided to establish the Global Deaf Woman. I became a life coach and business transformational coach to help deaf women set up their businesses or pursue any dreams they have, along with our support and guidance so they can thrive. I also recently published a book called The Light of Deaf Women. Congratulations. I saw that book. My grandmother has that book on her coffee table. Yes, this book is the collection of deaf women's success today. Every one of them shared their stories of their struggles, successes, and passions. Deaf people need to read these stories because they are role models they can look up to. That's the best way I can summarize my life. Perfect, thank you. This is a very important question before I start. You moved to New York and you found your Jewish deaf identity. But did you also find your New York identity? I hope you're a Yankee fan like me. Or do you not care? My family was never into sports. They're very into getting together for meals and always having festivities for our birthdays, bar mitzvahs, weddings, brees, and so on. Sorry to interrupt. I have another question I'm curious about. Your family, are they hearing or deaf? And how do they communicate at home with you? Yes, I have 3 sisters. 2 of them are hearing. My parents are hearing too. My younger sister is deaf. When they put us in the school at St. Petersburg, that's the new sign for St. Petersburg. there were 3 different kind of schools: hard of hearing, oral, and American Sign Language. Sorry, I mean RSL and deaf school with full-on signing. We were placed in the hard of hearing school. At school, it was required to learn both signing and speaking simultaneously. Growing up, I mostly spoke until we moved to America. My sister and I were 7 years apart, so she wasn't into being oral, more of signing. Therefore, I ended up being the middle person who interpreted conversations between her and the rest of my family. I encouraged my parents to learn sign language, and they told me, "Why? You speak very well." I said it was because of my little sister. They told me to keep on interpreting, so I kept on until I went to college, and that was when they were on their own. They had to find a way to communicate with each other with a broken language, consisting of a mixture of Russian and English. Interesting, okay. Ready for your 5 questions? Yes. Now, for my first question, can you share a story of when a wise person, either today or in the past, inspired you to become a leader? Can you share a story about that? Yes, it was definitely my mother. It's because of where we came from. The country's perspective of women was that they were expected to be domesticated. Since it's an Islamic country, most of the people were not fond of Jewish people. So I looked up to my mother. She worked in a hospital as a secretary. Many Jewish women had a hard time getting advanced education, let alone higher professions. My mother developed a good relationship with the hospital director and bribed her while asking that she take Jewish women under her wing so they can study the medical field to become a nurse, doctor, or other professions. My mother also made a network of women where she helped them advance their careers. That's the number one reason why I look up to my mother. It's not easy to be in her place. She faced oppression and it was dangerous. Second, being deaf in my culture, they sympathize and look down to people with disabilities. In my culture, people looked at the family status, their income, educational level, and such. It's not at all like Ashkenazi. It's totally different. They were worried that their 2 oldest hearing daughters wouldn't be able to get married because there were disabilities in the family. Young girls were taught skills early on like cooking, preparing to get married, and bearing children. It was a totally different mentality. So I was deaf and they didn't know what to do with me. They risked sending me to a school in St. Petersburg, which was big no-no for girls because I wasn't married. If I left the household, I would be ruined. My parents had to make some sacrifices for what was important. Everyone opposed the idea of sending me there, but my parents wanted me to have a successful future. They took a huge risk sending me there. That journey was challenging for me because that school pushed me to become a better person and to pay respect to the parents for giving me the best education. So my mother is the biggest role model. And number 2, she would always tell me, "You'll be alone in your country. Always be kind no matter how much people you oppress you." She told me to be strong and help other people. I ended up carrying that wisdom that was imparted on me. I remembered at the school, our class would have a roll calls of students. Religions were taboo during the communism, but oddly enough, students' names were listed as Russian, Russian, Russian. And I was born in the Soviet Union, so I should be considered Russian too, but nope, they listed me as Jewish. So I was always considered an outsider. If there were any kids in trouble, I was the one who got punished because I was Jewish. That didn't stop me because my mother told me to help other kids who weren't strong enough to defend themselves. That wisdom was within me. beautiful story. That made me think that people today, when they think of wisdom, they tend to think of a philosopher like Plato who wrote books. But oftentimes we fail to recognize that wisdom also comes from livelihood experiences and how we navigate through oppression, struggles, and share those experiences to generations. Your mother clearly shared that wisdom with you. Thank you for sharing. Now, for the second question, would you have done anything differently as a leader? If you knew you would not be judged as a Jewish person and as a woman leader, is there anything you would have done differently? Well, I need to think about that question. It just happens that leadership saved my life. Due to oppression and people telling me I can't do things, my parents gave me wisdom, strength, and the best education they could find. And then we moved to America. Leadership saved me because people have always told me, "No, you can't do this. You must get married young. No, you must stay home, cook, and take care of your home. You must serve everyone else." And they told me so many times at the school, "You think you know everything. You think you're so smart because you just moved here." It was because when I moved to America, I picked it up quickly and became involved with many roles in the Lexington School for the Deaf. Even though my English was limited, I was determined to get involved. I was involved in such things as being a chairsperson for prom, a chair for team conferences, and many more. I was also an editor for the yearbook and business manager for the bookstore. All these roles were my way of escaping because my family had a lot of religious expectations of me as a woman. So my leadership helped me analyze who I am, and helping people inspired me. I kept myself busy. And then I did the same thing at Gallaudet University. I got involved and became president of the International Students Club. They told me, "You just arrived here. People don't know who you are. You will not win." They were already judging me. They said since I'm an immigrant, they'll not take me seriously, you know? I did not let them stop me because I found that leadership kept me going. It kept my light inside still bright. I was chosen to be on that path. I was born with it. Thank you. Now for the third question. Can you share your experience looking back when you first acknowledged your identity as a Jewish deaf woman as an important factor in your leadership? When did you realize that? I'm curious. Like I mentioned, at my old school, they had a roll call of names and they were labeled me Jewish. They became my identity. I definitely knew I was Jewish. And secondly, I would visit my grandparents over the weekends during summertime. They always hosted Shabbat. And my parents would buy kosher meat at 4 or 5 in the morning while everyone is asleep to avoid being seen. My parents told me that you must separate it from dairy. We leave the meat with salt all day. I remember little things like that. Until we moved to New York City, I was in for a huge surprise. We openly celebrated Rosh Hashanah, Passover, and many more that I missed while growing up at the deaf school. At age 16, I had a shock culture tripled because first, being Jewish, secondly, being a woman, they explained my roles and responsibilities, and third, Jewish, deaf, woman as a third, being deaf when I was first went to the Lexington School for the Deaf. I was in awe that the teachers were deaf and used American Sign Language. I also signed under the table with my sister because in my culture back then, disabled people were not supported and can see pressure my parents were experiencing. So I respected them by signing my hands under the table to keep low profile to communicate. Until I took a deaf studies class that explained that American Sign Language is a part of our culture and identity. At that moment, I just knew. And I went home to my parents and told them American Sign Language is a beautiful language. After that, I changed and became proud using sign language. At the same time, I tried to show that being deaf is beautiful. Being a woman, I struggled with being a woman. Should I follow my culture and be domesticated? That means not being able to share my opinions or contribute to discussions. Or should I share my intelligence, my discussions, and show my abilities with people? Because I'm deaf, I felt like I had to work harder to show people. It was a huge struggle. My leadership helped me get confidence. I chose a different path to be a woman, to be free to represent my voice and pursue my dreams. I love traveling and I love contributing to the community, but it required a lot of compromises with my family. My parents eventually realized that me being a deaf Bukharian Jewish woman was not easy, so they let me go and be me. I married an Ashkenazi American man, and so on. As long as I kept my Jewish identity. One last thing, at Lexington School, they provided religious class once a week. My teacher asked me if I was interested in learning Hebrew. I said okay, and then I met up with a female rabbi who didn't know sign language, but somehow I could pick up on Hebrew. She asked me why I didn't have a bat mitzvah. I told her it was too late because I'm already 17. She told me, no, you have a good reason to do this now. Your country was under communism and you came to America for your freedom. I went home to discuss the idea with my parents, and they've never heard of such an idea. They're very religious and very precise about when traditions are honored. Tradition. And it's woman rabbi. Double no way. I was torn about it. But I decided to go ahead and had my bat mitzvah at 17. I studied as much as I could. It was my biggest pride moment. I felt it gave me validation as a Jewish person new to America. I made sure I fulfilled my role as much as I could as a Jewish deaf woman. I had a fascinating conversation with the deaf rabbi earlier this year. The rabbi said, disagreements, challenging traditions are integrated in Jewish culture. It's obvious that you live in that every day. Phew, I still do today. Still to this date. Same, I have never had my bar mitzvah. But your reason, I think, is a little bit more better than mine. When I was growing up, I wanted to watch football on the weekends. I was too bored to go to school. For your message, it's never too late. You can still do it, so maybe I should just do it too. Go for it, and you'll feel inspired. Yes. Next question is, if you can choose any book that you feel is important for people to read about being Jewish, is there any book you would recommend? Yes. Like you mentioned, I argued a lot. I argued a lot with my parents about how I should live as a Jewish deaf woman. They shared their views, I shared mine. I had independent thoughts. Somehow I had enough. Especially with religious expectations of me. Telling me I cannot do that. But I instilled a little bit of fear in me, since I didn't want to disrespect my family because they worked so hard to raise me. At the same time, I felt like something was missing and there was restrictions with being religious. But at that time, I was young, in my 20s, and I had an attitude. Somehow I came across the word Kabbalah and decided to sign up for classes on the topic. I've read several books that completely changed my life and perspectives as a Jewish person integrated with spirituality. My arguments with my family drastically reduced because the Kabbalah taught me how to become more conscious and see the world around me. Wisdom was learned there. It also taught me how to, like, if my parents laid out the rules of what was important, I would look at them with compassion and then let it go. I respected them and I did my thing. It worked out so well, so I have 3 books. I started with the basic Kabbalah and worked my way up to more complex books. I like that title, God is a Verb. Yes, that book was a tough read. I read that on my flight to London. I read the whole book, and my mind was blown. The view of the world is different. How I interact with people, and how I became more conscious. I applied those a lot as the business and life coach for clients on how they view themselves and represent in their daily lives. That book really instilled joy to me in my everyday life, no matter what challenges pop up. Speaking of the book, God is a Verb, I'm making the connection of conversation I had with the deaf rabbi about Jewish people cherishing actions more than thoughts. So yes, that title is fascinating. I need to put that on my reading list. Thank you for sharing. Sure. Now, for your last question. Many Jewish deaf people have found themselves facing Jewish issues where they feel unsure of their decisions or are pulling in different directions based on different values, feelings, and how to take care of situations. Can you share where you found yourself in with Jewish issues that you have personally wrestled with and navigated through your life? Yes, I'm happy this question was brought up because it's a lifelong journey. It depends on where you are and what kind of people you are surrounded by. I often find myself struggling as a Bukharian Jew from Uzbekistan. I feel responsible since they're such a small group in the world. I felt responsible to carry on traditions. And if I didn't honor those traditions, it means I didn't take my responsibility to respect them. Our identity could easily disappear. Identity that includes traditions going back thousands of years, of course, I valued them. And I felt the weight of that responsibility. After my time in St. Petersburg, we moved to New York City. And between 1989 to 1991, there was a mass immigration wave from Russia. So I met many Russian Jews. They were very intelligent and were not exposed to Jewish culture. When I talked with them, they tended to look down on those who were from the southern region where Uzbekistan was. Most of them were from the north part of Russia, while Uzbekistan is further down south and is an adjacent neighborhood is Afghanistan. Iran is located across the country to Uzbekistan, who's strongly influenced by Persian culture. Across the country, Eastern Europe had a strong influence there. Their views on Judaism were different. They always asked if I had strong literacy skills, whether I am able to read well, if it felt very competitive. I always had to mask on white privilege to survive and show them I was capable. It was always a battle for me. And then I moved to America and went to the deaf school where they asked about my background and if I came from a deaf family, I had to work my way up and showcase my signing skill to fit in because I wasn't fluent in American Sign Language. I also had to deal with stereotypes. You think Jewish people know everything? I was fortunate to process strong leadership skills and I always carry them. So should I be humble and just hide away? It was a lot of a struggle for me. And also, do I have to get married at an early age and marry someone in my group? I didn't want to be a domestic wife. So what should I do? There were a lot of questions for me to face every day. I realized that it's okay to be yourself and find what works for you. When I married an Ashkenazi Jewish man, I learned a lot about their traditions. I wasn't familiar with some of their words from the Torah. Instead, I host Shabbat dinner with family at home every Friday. I loved it because I think of our children growing up and what they would collect from their childhood. I remember going to my grandmother's, and it was my favorite thing, even though we didn't really have a lot, but we found a way to connect spiritually and feel fulfilled. It was a time when we all looked inward and saw what we've done that week. That moment, there was a strong connection. We chatted, we laughed, and appreciated how far we've come. That really helped us. It was enough for us. And then on Jewish holiday, I really tried to put in 10 times effort to make it very beautiful and festive, even though I didn't know all the relevant words the Ashkenazi have. The point is, I'm a proud Jew. Jewish people are only less than 2% of the world's population. I embrace it. Jewish belief is that life is precious and we must carry the light within us. That's how we carry on our strong identities. Live the best of your life. I hope that answered your question. Yes, thank you for sharing. Because I plan to ask you a follow-up question, asking if you had any wisdom you'd like to share with us, but you clearly share plenty of wisdom already with us. That's something you have in common with your mother. Both very wise people. It's really an honor and a privilege to chat with you. Thank you for your time, and I hope someday we can get together to celebrate Jewish holidays or Shabbat. Yes, definitely, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the time. Take care. Bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.